Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashrothi, and let's talk about the elephant in the room. Plex and Omega price update. All right, guys, I am trading in my cup of coffee for my glass of wine. So, you know this one's going to be good. Whew. We have a lot to cover. Okay, guys, this is a big topic. It dovetails into Fanfest and a bunch of stuff. So let's go ahead and strap in as we try to walk through this many notes. So first, let's go ahead and read the actual dev blog itself, and then we'll go over the subsequent pieces of it. So Plex and Omega price changes. Respected capsuleers, since EVE Online original launch back in 2003, together EVE's developers and community have led the charge in evolving what the sandbox MMO can be. The past 19 years have seen amazing events that have brought us closer together, delivered vast expansions, and game-changing feature enhancements, seen careful rebalancing to bring the best quality of experiences, and welcome technological updates that keep New Eden on the cutting edge, all in service of maintaining EVE's status as a world's best MMO. Man, that is a heck of a way of pitching. Like, hey, before we start this conversation, remember all those good things we did? The tradition of continuous improvement to EVE is set to continue. The road to Fanfest and beyond, with plans to make New Eden and community mightier than ever as EVE moves closer to its third decade, adding even more value to your Omega subscription. To continue investing in EVE Online's evolution and growth, and to realize our mission of EVE forever, we are updating the price of all existing Omega and Plex. This is an adjustment to reflect global trends impacting general production costs and account for years of inflation, amending the 1-month USD subscription rate for the first time since 2004. These adjustments will have an impact on other currencies. Starting the 17th of May, hey, look, there's that date again. The new prices will be as followed. Omega. So now you can get 1 month for $20. Right? Wait. I thought it was $25. Am I crazy? No, this should be 15. Right. Got it. So it was 15. Now it's 20. For 2 months. Right. The current cost for Omega is $15, and it goes down for different discounts. That's what this is. So it starts at $19 for 1 month, and it gets all the way down to $11.29 for a full year. So you have to get you have to get Omega 6 months at a time to get the same rate that you would have if you have got them 1 month at a time previous to this. And remember, now, if you get... Thank you for joining us. Now, if you get it, you would get your own discount for 6 months, right? So, like, let's actually check that out right now. I go to the store and go to... Is it PAX? No, we're just going to go Omega. So I can get 1 for $15, 2 for $38, or sorry, 3 for $38, which now it's going to be $47. 6 for $71. So you used to be able to get $11.95 a month if you got 6 months. Now you get basically the $15.95 a month if you get this deal. And then this is $10.95, which for the 12 months, it's going to be $11.30. So actually the 12 months is, I believe, like the smallest difference of them all, which is small consequence to the people that are trying to deal with this stuff. This is a huge change. It represents basically what? Oh yeah, you're right. This is 2 months. So 12 months would be 150 versus... Sorry. The 131 So $20 extra. Is that right? 12 to 49. So yeah, that's still a pretty good deal. I mean, in the new framework. A bad deal on the old framework. For sure, 100%. Plex. The Plex tiers have been entirely restructured, offering several more options from 50 Plex to 20,000 Plex. Hold on. All right. So for 50 Plex, you can get 50 Plex for $250. Sorry, $2.50. 100 Plex for $5. 250 for $12.49. 500 Plex for $25. This used to be $20. There is a premium. There's always been a premium on Plex. Some people were wondering why the Plex prices went up. They had to, because now Omega is the same cost as Plex. You can't, like, they need to make, you might get the same price if you take a 6-month sub, but you have to pay that upfront all at once. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It is upfront, and even if you do argue that that gets you below the current price, you could have still done that same deal now and gotten a better option now. So, yeah, either way, it's basically a 33% increase in cost. If we go here, 500 Plex has to be greater than 1 month Omega. That's correct. By the way, a little bit of history. The $20, it used to be that the very first time when you subscribed to the game, you didn't pay $15, you paid $20. You did get a couple of extra days of game time, I believe, but that $5 was supposed to cover the, the administrative fee for the creation of the character. And so like $20 was the inefficient way of buying a month, as it were, which is why Plex ended up being that amount. Or not why, but like, you get what I'm saying? Like those were all lined up. So 7,430 Plex is $250 right now. I imagine that this is not going to be quite as clean of a distinction, or that, this number is going to change rather. Not. So let's see, $250. $250 currently can get us 7,430 Plex. $250 you can't just buy $250, but it'll be 6,000 Plex to get $240. So $10 less or 1,400 Plex less, which is like, yeah, 33%. Look at that. Some of us bought the damn DVD with the game on it. Look, I didn't do that, but I did do this. Hold on. Ah. See, so, I mean, I know a thing or two about giving CCP money. And then the biggest one right now is $500 for 1,500 Plex. Sorry, 15,000 Plex. And now it is $750. You know what's crazy? This tier exists because people spend that. There are whales that probably spend this a couple times a month, maybe every month. But yeah, $500 versus now $700 for 20,000, 15,000. So to get 15,000 before, well, you couldn't get 15,000 before. $420, $500. So, you spent more than that on Twitch this month. Well, that's because you're a hero of the community, Midnight Space Monkey. All right. So obviously this is quite a bit. The new prices of Omega includes all upcoming content releases for the game and have been structured to offer substantial savings when you purchase larger amounts of Plex in Omega time. This is nothing new. Players benefit from even bigger monthly savings between lower and upper Omega time tiers and more Plex options to choose from, right down to economical 50 Plex offering. We're committed to bringing you the absolute best version of Eve and compelling future for New Eden. We can't wait to meet up with you in person and discuss in detail at Fanfest in just a few weeks. Okay, so this drops on a Friday. And as one could potentially predict, the Eve community loses their goddamn mind. And to a certain extent, rightfully so. But I think as we explore this topic, we may find a little bit of method to the madness. We're gonna step into this. All right. First and once this was out, once this was released, there was a well, actually, as a total aside, there is now the Eve forum, or sorry, the Eve Discord has been relaunched. So this is a Discord that was originally for coordination for, I want to say Fanfest, but I can't remember exactly. But it's been more or less repurposed as now the official EVE Online Discord. And it got a lot of publicity on Friday because CCP Paragon hopped on the stage feature of the Discord and decided to have a little chat with us. I don't necessarily want to play the entire thing. You're free to if you would like to. I know that there's a couple of copies of it. I thought I had it before. But I do have a recap from Reddit. Check out. So, why are you light mode? Why are you light mode? What are you doing? This is terrible. It's not even loading. That's weird. Whatever. Fine. We'll all collectively get over it, I think. Let's see. So, and I listened to it. Several of the questions were asked by me. You can hear it if you listen to the actual talk. But we're going to go over the recap. Is there going to be significant content release with the change? It says yes. Largest one that we have ever done. This is in quotes. I went back and listened to it. I did not hear this quote either time I have listened to the actual record. Either when I listened to it live or when I listened to the recording. What he said was that they said that they haven't done expansions for a while, and what they have is cooler than anything that they've done in a long time. I believe that was roughly the words that they said. I'm not trying to like soften things for them or anything. I feel like these things are accurate, or it's important to be accurate, because if we say, oh, but you claimed it would be the largest one when it isn't the words that they used, then that just makes us look like idiots. On top of EVE Online being more expensive, we also have gas prices, energy prices, grocery prices. But see, that is an interesting point. Where do you live, Bad Blood, by the way? I mean, roughly. You don't have to tell me, but like, so, but we're going to look at what they may have going for them. Yeah, Netherlands. So, yeah, it was brought up on the Meta Show actually by Brisk, and it was very cogent. I hadn't thought of it, but one of the issues is, sorry, let me actually get to this point first. He was asked why. Paragon says that the cost of business is no longer sustainable on the current cost of Omega and Plex with the number of players. He explained, and he said this over and over again. Like right now, this isn't exactly how I'd phrase it. He said that they were sustainable, that there's nothing to worry about, but they want to increase their development significantly as well. And yeah, he did cite Russia as a primary factor or primary reason, which the Russia situation wasn't necessarily mentioned wasn't mentioned directly in the post, the original post. And that has been a sticking point for a lot of people. Two things about that. First, there's just the factual accuracy of the piece of what he said, right? Like losing a bunch of Russian subscribers could hurt pretty bad, right? Like we know that the Russian contingency is a pretty big piece of the player base, and have them be literally incapable of giving CCP money is probably bad. But on top of that, and this is the part that Brisk pointed out, CCP is based in London. Tranquility physically exists in London. Blizzard Entertainment is in California. Final Fantasy XIV is in Japan with server clusters elsewhere. There is one, they have their European server cluster in Germany. But in the case of Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, they have so many different servers that the overall cost, like percentage of their costs, the increase of their cost as a percentage is smaller, right? So like, even if raw numbers wise, they both have the same increase in their actual cost through like increased power bills or anything like that. Even if it was identical, because of the fact that Final Fantasy and World of Warcraft has a much larger scale, and a lot of that scale exists outside of that area, that allows them to soften that blow significantly more. And on top of that, Final Fantasy XIV, couldn't expand their server cluster like they wanted to because there just wasn't silicon transistors, I think, available to like build new servers. But in addition to that, Final Fantasy XIV has become Square Enix's cash cow, and they know it. So if they need to soak up a little bit for a little while, they're going to. CCP might not be as much. So do I think that the Russia thing is that big of a deal? Maybe, maybe not. I do think that when he says that it was the primary reason, it's worth noting that when he originally mentions it, he talks about the cost of maintenance, the cost of business. So the Russia situation, and the credit that he gives to the Russian situation is more than just the lack of money, although he does cite that directly, that they can't pay subs. But the original thing he cites is the increased cost to infrastructure. And that's, fair play, I suppose. Have you considered the number of players? We got a lot of questions that end up being either something that is probably not going to be answered by CCP Paragon right here, or likely to be announced at FanFest. But one of the things he does go into is that they're looking into a program to allow you to have more than one account. The Power of Two that he mentioned allowed you to spin up another character and give it 6 months of game time, but it wasn't like an ongoing thing. So we'll have to keep an eye on what that means in the future. But I personally believe that adding more benefit to having multiple accounts over having it be cheaper to join the game is a net negative. I would much rather people be incentivized to have friends than to have alts. But I can understand that it's a complicated issue because EVE Online has an increasing interest in multi-boxing. I'll put it that way. Let's pause on this Russian payment thing here. There's a multi-million business. Russian businesses are using other routes like China for payment processing. Are you telling me CCP China isn't stepping up here? I have no idea what CCP Shanghai is doing, but and I don't know the bits of it, but I believe if there's a sanction, then circumventing it would probably be a problem. Again, I'm not going to go into the actual details of it. My point is that even if you consider the people not working or no longer paying for it, right, but they're still a European company. They don't sub people out of Shanghai. Shanghai, I legitimately don't even know what Shanghai is up to right now. So, but they're not maintaining tranquility, that's for sure. Or serenity, for the matter. How can you justify being the most expensive MMO in the game? He says, I'm not sure we can justify it. He does mention that our standard microtransactions like skins don't scale. I was one of the people that asked, like, why not look into things like alliance structure or alliance skins, structure skins, cat ears, etc. I don't like the answer that they don't feel they can get enough funding through microtransactions, given the fact that they have been So, like, it is not hard to argue that CCP is not maximizing their potential out of microtransactions. I'll put it that way. Without becoming exploitive. But there is one thing that he mentions about this too, which I think that we get into in a second. But what I love is he says, I don't know what the question was. This was actually mine, which was, so when they said, is it worth being the most expensive MMO in the game or in the market? His response was like, well, I don't know. You would have to talk about individuals. He was pretty dancy when it comes to his answers. But so I specifically asked him about WoW and Final Fantasy 14, right? And he said that as far as WoW is concerned, he believes that what they have coming is better than WoW, that what CCP offers is more than Blizzard does. I mean, I can kind of agree with that. Also, at this point, I think he points out the fact that, like, these games do have a $15 a month cost, or maybe even 10, but they also have expansions that people pay for. So every year or two, people pay 40, 50 bucks a month. Doesn't necessarily make up the full difference, but as he pointed out, like, they just have different monetization. Is 13 bucks a base? Maybe after your currency exchange. I'm talking in US dollar. I'm reasonably sure it's 15. I could double check if need be, but it almost doesn't matter at this point. The issue, or the point that was raised, was that the subscription for MMOs don't necessarily show the entire cost because expansions are a thing, of which CCP is always famously not charged for. I can accept that, but I feel like that CCP comes out with free expansions has always been one of the things that it's like their feather in their cap. And so I feel like they're kind of spending the good grace from that. Like, the expansions are no longer free, right? Like, if that's your argument. Skin saturate eventually. You're correct. But I'm not saying that they're wrong and that it couldn't be, that it would scale infinitely. I'm just saying that I want to believe that there's a pretty big gulf from where they are now to where they start hitting that threshold. And it doesn't make sense for them to neglect microtransactions. I don't necessarily believe that this implies that they are neglecting microtransactions. I feel like this is in addition to microtransactions, especially given some of the other details that we get. How much Plex got drained out of the Plex for good, the timing to make Plex much more expensive in the market that needs refeeding. We're going to talk a little bit more about the timing of it. That's a big thing. But I do find it interesting. I don't know if it's unfortunate or whatever that the Plex for Good campaign obviously takes a bunch of Plex out of the system. But it is. So here's the thing about that. So when it comes to the Plex for Good campaign and its relationship to Plex, it's probably more important to think about it as a real life thing rather than an in-game thing, right? The CCP Plex is a risk on their books, right? Because for every 500 Plex, that means that they might not get 15 bucks that month. So it's kind of like a coupon or a gift card or something like that. It's not money that they've lost, but it is potential future money that they don't have access to because of it. I can't remember the official name for that kind of thing, but it's monitored on the books. So, like, Plex has a real life value to it, and with Plex for Good, this is more than true, because with Plex for Good, we are allowed to reconvert Plex into cash, because for the amount that we donate in Plex, they would donate in cash to the foundation. Hold on. No, Plex is money gathered in advance. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, when $60 worth of Plex is created they have to put it as $60 of liability on their books in the same way that you would with gift cards. They kept saying that Fanfest is going to be the biggest content update ever. I have yet to hear the word biggest, but yeah, we're going to talk about that. Even if they oversold it, it should be pretty decent content upgrade. Yeah, they suggested that it would be the coolest in a long time, but that was just what Paragon said. Other people have said other things in the last few months. Yeah, liability on the balance sheet. So think about it this way. If they had done Plex for Good after this change, then they would have to pay 33% more to the foundation for the same amount of Plex. Because this isn't the same as normal Plex calculation, inflation or deflation. Hearthstoner, thank you for joining us. Immortal. This is increasing the intrinsic value of Plex. Or given the fact that Plex and money are exchangeable currencies, you could say that Plex has now been strengthened against the US dollar, right? Plex now has more buying power for the US dollar. It takes more US dollars to get the same amount of Plex. So if they had made Plex that was purchased at a $20 rate, but then they evaluated it at a $25 rate for Plex for Good, that would be a problem. So I can definitely understand the goal of getting Plex to as low as possible prior to making this kind of change. I don't think that this Plex for Good necessarily was influenced by that fact. But I think that these are all, in a certain way, a conflagration of things. You know, they may not cause each other, but they may have the same cause, as it were. Why wouldn't they give more money to the peoples of Ukraine? On the one hand, that would be awesome. On the other hand, again, if you look at it from a booking standpoint, when you look at it from a so they can justify it as a company because they got $20 and they know they got $20. So now they know they can give $20 when they get it back. But if they know that they got $20 and they give $25, they have done something very bad, you know? So, however, all of this comes to something like, I feel like all of this is related. And we're going to go into that. Mr. President, what did you know? When did you know it? Yeah. All right. Do you think it's worth the 35% hike? So he said, I mean, like, he was a lot like, well, it's up to you. Like, you're the one that's going to have to decide this, not us. He seemed very confident with this. And that's consistent with the rest of the CCP presentations that I've seen in the last 3 or 4 months. I have bad news for you. Well, actually, Manser, I'm reasonably sure it's not going to be an FPS. I'll put it that way. We'll get to it. But like, CCP has not been a very confident company since the Summer of Rage. Prior to 2010, CCP was incredibly confident. They felt that they understood the game better than anybody else. Everybody had always told them that they couldn't do what they were doing, and they did it anyways. But with Incarna and the Summer of Rage, they got taken down a peg. And ever since then, they've been kind of on the back foot and nervous. You know, we see the no more Jesus features. That was the big thing. We promised no more Jesus features. We're not going to try and make any big things that is like the big thing. We're just going to work on like the content that's already there and, you know, upgrades. And that worked for a little while. However, I got to say this right now. EVE Online is in more dire need of a Jesus feature in the history of EVE Online. Like, to its literal definition of like what you would think of when you think of a Jesus feature, you know? Like, not only does it need to be like the second coming of the Messiah, but it also needs to resurrect from the dead, you know? Jesus feature is about as accurate as you could get for what kind of feature that they need right now. Walk on heavy water. You never heard of the term Jesus feature? Hold on a second. Eve Online Jesus. I'll look up no more Jesus features. Can we please have Jesus features? No more Jesus features. I can't find it, but either way, it was something. It was like their big buzzword when they were kind of trying to rebuild good grace with the community after the Plex price change. So, but I think that a lot has changed, in you know, a lot of time has gone by, and it's time. Someone in Twitter leaks Helmar meeting with NFT Muppets followed by a Not for Tranquility gate. I mean, I was encouraged by Not for Tranquility. It tells me that whatever they were looking at isn't going to. Did I close the wrong? Oh, hold on. Right, we're on the recap. Being on the back foot for over a decade, though, that's rough. It is. It is absolutely. And then they said the same thing about skill injectors and stuff, and then they did it anyway. So NFTs are coming. I doubt it. And not because I believe CCP, but because, like, anybody who's paying attention to the gaming industry right now, like, it's no coincidence that there was several pretty big failures of even larger companies like Ubisoft failing to, like, actually utilize the NFTs in a meaningful way, in addition to all of the scams and whatnot, has caused a major cooling off of that buzzword recently. It may come back in a future iteration of some kind. And they have talked about using blockchain technology for other things, like, for instance, the API. But legitimately, it just doesn't make any sense. All right. Was this something that Pearl Abyss made you do? They pointed out that Pearl Abyss does not influence EVE Online as much as he knows, or as far as he knows. Why are you not focused on growing the player base? He says that they are focusing on the player base, which I think is another clue. Hopefully people will stay when they see it given in return. And they do, he does suggest something. He actually, the one thing he steps out of line with, at one point, he says something that he's not sure whether or not it's okay for him to say. He even says, like, well, if I get heat for this, then that's fine. But he points out that there is, hold on. What was the expression? There are some services which have been asked for by a lot of people, which will be added as premium features for Omega clones. Which has a lot of potential. That statement has a lot of potential. I'm just going to give two examples of what I've thought of for this. One, there could be a new, like, say, PI feature for the phone. So now you can control your PI from your phone. This is something we've talked about for years. If that's the thing that they announce, it would make sense for them to require Omega status to be able to access that feature. Just as an idea. More mundanely, it could be as easy as Omega clones now have access to 20 clone slots instead of 10 or 11. Like, that would be an example. So those are just two different examples of the kind of things that I think could potentially be meant by services that have been asked for a long time that we're going to put behind Omega. So that's pretty much what they had to say about it. Now let's go ahead and break this down a little bit more. Let's talk about what I think it all means. At its high level, I think that like, first of all, I want to understand both the angst and CCP's confidence, as it were. Again, my point about the whole Summer of Rage thing wasn't the fact that like whether or not it's a Jesus feature, but the whole point of it was that CCP has been largely not Valamir, you can ease off a little bit. Shoot, I just lost my point. Oh, CCP has a tendency to not come off as overly confident, especially after the Summer of Rage. They often say that they have no idea whether or not what will actually come out of it. I mean, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. My bad. Or, you know, whatever. It's still in the record. Apologize. So seeing CCP oversell something, especially to this point, is very unusual. So this isn't like I for those of you who haven't been paying attention to this previously, I can say this. CCP isn't known, especially recently, for blowing smoke up our ass in this kind of way. They've obviously announced features that didn't pan out or whatever, but like they have consciously and knowingly put a ton on the line. Everything, I would say everything on the line for this Fanfest. More than they needed to, right? Because it's not just this announcement. We also have the issue of, or we have CCP Rotati's interviews, when I think in the latest one, or one of the latest ones, they talk about how the next, we're going to get tons of new content this year. This year's the year of content, but they're not going to be able to talk about it until after until FanFest. And we kind of hear echoes about that from Paragon as well, where they talk about how, well, the last 2 years has been scarcity and painful, but during that whole time, they've been telling us that this was all for something. And that for the next 2 years, we get to reap the rewards for the work or the cost of the last 2 years. That's a pretty tall order. In a very, very real way, the FanFest keynote not only has to answer for this Plex and Omega price update, that's not even the biggest piece. This FanFest keynote needs to answer for why the last 2 years happened. We need to be able to walk away from FanFest understanding what the hell all of this has been for. Why all the pain? Why scarcity? What benefits do we get? What have you been working on all this time? So that brings up the fundamental difference in what I believe is happening between how the player base is viewing the current situation broadly and how CCP views the situation, again, broadly. For the player base's side of things, I'm going to use kind of what I gathered from what the Matani was saying about it, because he's a pretty good voice for such things, like it or not. And it really boils down to lack of belief that they can possibly deliver on it, right? Straight up saying they're not ready. And there is a lot of weight behind that. CCP has a long history of bungling things. I will suggest that recently they've gotten a ton better ever since Invasions on both iteration and the quality of their content. But it's true. CCP has failed to stick the landing on far more things than they've succeeded. So skepticism is well-founded. In addition to that, so if you believe that they haven't been working on anything, then this line of reasoning makes sense. So let's talk about why I think that CCP is confident and what makes some of these answers that we've been seeing make more sense, including CCP Swift's answer about, selling ships and all that kind of stuff. So first and foremost, the Plex change, the end of the CSM period, and at least one other thing. Oh, it looks like potentially the end of the Capsuleer Day event. All relate to the 17th. A couple months ago, CCP has said that they want to move away from their previous system of using quadrants and back towards an expansion type system. So let's look at this. CCP, or EVE Online, in the beginning, and for a very long time, had 2 expansions a year, right? There's a couple of these where it wasn't, but pretty quickly they got into this rhythm of one in the spring and one in the winter, right? We have the summer release and we have the spring and we have the winter release. That's fine. And this goes all the way through to Tyrannus. No, sorry. Incursion, Incarna, Inferno. Right. So Summer of Rage, Recovery from the Summer of Rage. And then they hit Rubicon and Oceanus. All right. And we see 2013, that's normal. Then September 2014, and then April 2016. So what happened there? Well, what happened there was CCP announced in 2014 that they were going to be moving away from expansions. All right. In fact, they cited the next several patches: Chronos, Cryas, Hyperion, Oceanus, Phoebe, Rhea, Tethys, Thea, and Thermus, which of course we now know Phoebe, if you've ever heard of the Phoebe jump changes, Phoebe is where when we got the jump fatigue, and Rhea was when we got the industry change, the last big industry change. So they transitioned away from these kinds of programs. They went away from having these big tentpole expansions and towards this system. The reason why they did that was because prior to this, they were locked into these 3-month schedules, where basically, or 6-month schedules, where they had this like routine, right? Where, they would go through the phase in which they decide what they're going to do for the expansion, the development of that expansion, the packaging it all up and releasing it. So what that means is that if the feature could not be finished in a single expansion, they just couldn't do it. If they didn't believe that they could finish a project within a single expansion, within a single expansion window, then they just didn't do it. And this is why a lot of the early features was left fallow, because either it wasn't worth dedicating very precious cycle times to, or more importantly, the change or whatever was so expansive that it required more than a expansion worth of effort for. Most famously, and I think that one of the changes that precipitated this change was Citadels, or not Citadels, POSes. They announced that they were going to do modular POSes, an upgrade to POS system, and then they later said that they couldn't do it. That when they evaluated it, they determined that it would take an entire expansion cycle to do, and they couldn't justify that because not enough of the percentage of the population actually used the POSes. So it was a big problem. And when they decoupled from that, that's when we start getting things like Brain in a Box and other projects that were divorced from how long they took to complete. This is important. Then Citadel represents the return to expansions. We see Citadel release, then Ascension, then Lifeblood, and Into the Abyss. We didn't have a spring 2017 one, although I think that there was actually more minor patches between these. And then we have Into the Abyss, which was a very significant expansion. We have Onslaught, which was the introduction of flex structures. And then we have Invasions. Invasions represented another change, right? Invasions was the first time that they had like this active plot line that was going to take place over the course of a few years that actually played itself out. So you have Invasion Chapter 1, 2, and 3. And although the next one is called Chapter 2, they were doing different expansion, or they were doing different patches every 6 weeks, I think it was the cycle that they had at that time. Invasions Chapter 2 was part of the Eclipse Quadrant. So the month before Invasion Chapter 2, they announced that they were going to change their structure once again. They were going to go into these structured quadrants where every 3 months we would get kind of an idea of what that was going to be, trailer and all that kind of stuff. Then work our way through it. And then at the end of it, we would, run out of all the stuff that we knew was going to kind of be coming. And then we move on to the next one. And you know what? It really, really worked. The Abyss trailer, or not the Abyss, the Eclipse trailer is phenomenal. It did a... Glorification, the fit, mortification, the unfit. Hoppy, you, sir, are glorified. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hope you had a good stream. So, the Eclipse Quadrant had an amazing trailer that was super juicy. And we speculated about it throughout the whole thing. And by the end of it, we felt pretty satisfied that we got what we understood what they were going for besides the Jita attack. However, that was also the best quadrant as far as like execution is concerned. Every quadrant after that became more and more haphazard. The trailers became less about like seeding all these kinds of hints and more about, maybe 1 or 2 keynote features like with Phoenix. And then eventually by the next year, they're already starting to let entire months slip by, and eventually had one like condensed quadrant because of it. So Invasion Chapter 2 is not actually the quadrant. It was one patch within the quadrant. It just happened to be the most noteworthy. Even though, honestly, Invasion Chapter 2 wasn't that big of a change. This is not when the Invasion War began. This is just the introduction of the Zenitra. But Invasion Chapter 2 is like a big part of like EVE Vegas, which was one of the last big announcements during the EVE Fanfest Invasion World Tour in 2019. So it got the most like sexy billing, right? Fight or Flight was in January. This is when we got the nullsec. We got the Dragonar Blitz event. So lowsec. This is when we start to see much more development into the event system, and we also see the inclusion of the Nirvana faction implants, which are the shield slaves, the implants that increase your shield buffer hit points, which basically CCP Fozzy had previously shown a bunch of different pirate implants that they were going to introduce within the next 2 weeks to Singularity, and then he got immediately moved to a different team, and so it never happened. And then 8 months later or something like that, this is where we see it. So Fozzy gets moved to the events team. And so over the course of the next year, we see those implants that he earlier promised over the course of that year, with each implant being released along with that Empire's event for that year, right? So in this case, the Sancha were the ones delivering the technology during the Dragonar Blitz event. And so the Nirvana implants we get. Invasion Chapter 3. This is, of course, this was huge, right? Invasion Chapter 3 was when it actually turned into a two-way war. We see a big play out of that. But as you can see, basically, That's it. Nothing else. We've had changes. We've had updates. We even had a couple of quadrants still. But overall, there has been a pretty dearth of content, at least organized, structured content, i.e. like a packaged up in a big thing that's celebrated for a while now. They've let the quadrants decay. In fact, they've now completely canceled them. And they've said that they want to go back to the expansion system. So, Scarcity begins part way through, I believe, Invasion Chapter 2. And as part of Scarcity, prior to Scarcity, I had talked to CCP, and they had lamented the fact that they couldn't necessarily come out with new content with new rewards, or with just straight up like ISK rewards or whatever, because there were too many faucets in the game. Even back in like 2017, they had this worry. Hold on. So they had this. Oh shoot! Hold on. All right. So they had this concern where they couldn't actually put in new content with rewards because there already was like too much, like the ecosystem, as we now think of it, was already considered to be out of balance. So I'm not saying that this is what Scarcity was for, but let's think about this from a practical point of view. Okay. We've received almost no content over the last couple of years. We've had a couple of sites. We have the road drone sites. We have the SEC sites. We have the ESS sites, or we have, sorry, the Capital Shipyard sites. We, of course, have the new events. We have all the different events that they've come out with. But, like, nothing meaty. And more importantly, all of those things that I just mentioned. Oh, and crab beacons. All of those things that I just mentioned are kind of noteworthy in the fact that they are very undervalued in what they reward, to the point where it's largely not worth doing these things. Sir Goonie? We're going to go with that. Goonie. Thank you for joining us. Crab beacons are still not worth it. Well, yeah, I mean, like, but this would make sense. Like, if they're already taking out all of the content for 2 years, they can't put in new content during that time because that would go counter to what they are trying to do. So if there was content being built, they would not really be releasing it, or they would be releasing it in small pieces in order to test stuff that was kind of rewarded, but not really, in order to get people to try it out, which is exactly what we see. So the question I have is, what has CCP been doing since Invasion Chapter 3? Specifically, after Poachfin. Because that's really when we saw things kind of completely die out in that regard. We have two pieces to say about that. One, to those people who are saying that this is a sign that CCP is dying or on maintenance mode or anything like that, yes, there is COVID. That's absolutely true. That is a factor. However, in regards to whether or not CCP is dying, I will suggest that CCP has been hiring this entire time. In fact, CCP's staff is never larger than it has been before. And most of that staffing up happened just prior to and during Scarcity. So it isn't for a want for development effort. In 2019, during the Invasion World Tour, they talked a lot and showed off a lot about what they were thinking about going towards, right? This living sci-fi universe. They were really intrigued at the idea of like this was when they were really like hyped up. They got really jazzed up about the idea of the NPCs fighting each other in the big conflict that never involved anybody. Basically, their Drifter AI stumbled upon a Blood Raider Sodio, I think it was, and triggered a response. And so there was this massive conflict that happened, which no player witnessed. And this was a big enough deal that it made it into like made it to the news. Like, I mean, gaming news, but news. They made a big deal of it. And in a lot of ways, like the invasion stuff kind of is a big piece of that, because like Invasion Chapter 3, the rats actually fought each other, right? Which historically the AI had a lot of problems fighting each other. Like that has always been their biggest blocker. That was the bug that caused the Drifter attacks to have to be canceled or delayed. Not the nullsec ones, the original ones, the Throne Worlds attack. When they launched it, it turned out that the AI, when it tried to calculate them fighting, ended up overwhelming the node. And so they couldn't do it. And so years later, during invasions, they did. So we see a big advancement there. But the question still remains, what were they doing during that time? What they've talked about was a living sci-fi universe. What they talked about was things like dynamic interests, better ways of communicating with the NPCs, different like visuals and audio when it comes to this kinds of stuff. I mean, they were somewhat candid, but there was a lot of this idea that they wanted to take what they had learned and gotten out of invasions, in particular, and use it to make Eve more alive. And then we've seen openly none of that, but actually we've seen a lot of it. A lot of the MPE ties into that same stuff. The avatars coming up and talking to you. In fact, the aura that we see in the MPE was previewed originally in Eve Vegas 2019. The whole idea of like how they do storytelling and whatnot, you can see them putting the pieces in over the course of the last year or a couple of years. The other changes that we see are changes that don't involve the introduction of new content, right? Industry change, market change. I can't think of any, whatever, but like, you get what I'm saying? Like, these don't actually add new resources into the game. They shore up older systems and update them so that way they can put in the levers that they want to control them later on. They were setting the groundwork, as they said. And the issue with these changes are that all of them were something that either the player base by and large didn't care about, or the player base was antagonistic against. Because, to be honest, some things were too easy, too basic, too simple. And the player base, nobody likes the quote unquote nerf, but the reality of it is that people in the future are going to know the current reality as the reality, right? Everybody who joined after the invention changes don't even understand that there's some sort of weird thing about like that battleships used to be built only by minerals, right? If you joined before Scarcity, the chances are you don't even know that you used to be able to get everything you needed from a single band of space to build basically anything you want. Depends. I mean, there's a big ass right there, but especially null and even to a lesser extent high. So all of this leads me to what I think CCP is up to. Firstly, I believe that there is an expansion level event coming on the 17th. I believe that they're going to announce an expansion level event on the 6th and have it launch on the 17th. That expansion is going to be coupled with the price changes. So that kind of locks in those. That's the missing piece to a lot of what Paragon said. This is why he said, like, you're going to have answers. You're going to have, like, oh, just wait till FanFest and all this other stuff. Like, the idea is that they have an expansion level event coming on the 17th, and they announce it 2 weeks earlier. That makes sense to me. So let's assume, for the sake of this conversation, that that is correct, and they have an expansion planned for the 17th. What that means is basically all of the work that they have done over the last 2 years could possibly pay off in ways that we weren't even fully aware that they were developing at all. There's a lot of notes about how, like, the CSM have been kind of muscled out, and that is a source of angst by people. But when it comes to this in particular, I see it as encouraging, right? If the CSM had seen a bunch of stuff and didn't like it, then I would be worried. But given the fact that they've seen nothing in a lot of ways, this leads me to believe that that CCP does not feel the need to show it to the CSM first, right? And therefore, they've been hidden away. NDA reasons, whatever else reasons. Ultimately, if they either don't need the CSM's feedback, or you could just guess, then why present it to the CSM first, right? If you know a change is not going to be popular, then why get the angst from the CSM before you do it? Just, like, make it happen. If you know you've got something big coming and it doesn't require direct feedback, you can get feedback on pieces of it. But if they've been planning on this announcement, whatever it is, probably for quite some time, at least not completely, but, like, the idea of this. So I would not expect them to give the CSM too much of a heads up about totally new features that they're going to develop and do, regardless of what the CSM's feedback is. Does that make sense? So the more I hear from CSM that they're getting radio silence, the more I feel like they are just being cut out, not that there's nothing to show. I think that that's a big one. So is this change as crazy as they seem to suggest that it is? No, the CCP made the CSM because they got caught cheating. The CCP did. Is this announcement big enough? Well, we talked earlier about what the Mittani and the player base feel about this, that they're not ready, that it's not going to be whatever. But I think that if you put together all of the pieces of everything that they've said, I get the understanding that CCP thinks that whatever this is going to be is going to massively increase the public view of EVE Online. That rather than this necessarily strictly placating to us, what this is actually going to do is rebrand EVE Online as a game that is accessible to more people, and therefore bring in a bunch more people, which is why you're going to want to do the price update ahead of time, which is why you're going to do all this MPE work, which is why a lot of the work that they've been being put into is sites and narratives and, storytelling and all that kind of stuff. And which is why they, dang, I had another point, but either way. So we also have the comic book that's supposed to be coming out this year. We have the shooter that they could easily announce. So if you think about this, this isn't necessarily an announcement that's about feature or features. This is about attempting to relaunch EVE Online to the world with the expectation that they will be attractive to enough new people that we will be rendered into the minority. I feel pretty strongly that at least CCP thinks that that is like their goal. We'll see. But I seriously think that they've been working on this since takeover by PA. They are working towards a rehabilitation of the brand. Okay. That's what seems to make the most sense to me. We'll see. Again, do I think that it will do it? I don't know. I think that CCP thinks it will, if that makes sense. So let's talk about the timing of the event itself. A lot of people have criticized the fact that it was mentioned now, that if they mentioned it along with what we were going to get out of it, that it would somehow make it better. First and foremost, I'm going to take a sip of wine. Here's my hot take. Nothing that we feel about the situation today matters a tiny, tiny bit. Nothing. You could have hope right now. You could have angst right now. You could unsubscribe right now. Unless you're buying like a package deal. That's the only thing that really matters. But like that sale's over. So like it legitimately does not matter how we feel about things right now. If Fanfest delivers, then they win. And if Fanfest fails to deliver, they lose hard. And this announcement did not change the calculus of that. It already was true. They already had to answer for all of scarcity. So it doesn't matter how much faith we have right now. I don't know what they're going to deliver. I'm just putting down the groundwork here that whether or not we liked this particular announcement doesn't matter. What matters is how we react to Fanfest, because that's what's going to make a difference. No Man's Sky was awful when it came out, but now nobody, like, that's just a curiosity. It's a quirk of their story. Nobody makes a decision on whether or not they're going to buy No Man's Sky based on how much angst there was when it was released. Do you understand what I'm saying? So ultimately, their success or failure is 100% on that presentation and 0% on how they prep, or how they, well, not 0, but like very low percent, how we feel about it right now. Very low percent, not 0. Which brings me to another piece of this. So you could announce this at 3 times. You like No Man's Sky even at release? Well, yeah. I mean, there were definitely people that did. Focus on more on the fun. I think so. Like, I think that it's going to be more story driven, more empire driven, more narrative driven, and all that sort of stuff. So where was I? Oh, so you could announce it before. You can announce it during during Fanfest, or you can announce it after Fanfest. Those are your 3 options, right? Like, I mean, you're going to announce it. It's one of those 3 times. So let's examine those for a second. Before we do, though, I want to note, just so that we can keep this in the back of our mind, they announced it before Fanfest, and it comes into effect after Fanfest. I do not believe that this is a mistake or an accident. So let's say that they have a blowout announcement to have happen during Fanfest. They're going to go on stage and have an hour or more of a keynote in which they come out with beat after beat after beat that makes us go, holy shit. Let's just give them that for the sake of this conversation. having to add into that. And that is why we're having to regrettably increase the money to $20 and have that be the moment that they announce it, makes the price increase part of the announcement, right? It becomes packaged together. If you announce it after the fact, then it feels a little bit like bait and switch, or at the very least, it takes a lot of the wind out of the sails. They announce this big expansion, and then like between the announcement of the expansion and the release of the expansion, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, you're gonna have to pay more money. So neither of those options actually end up being very good. If you announce it beforehand, we now get a chance, 2 weeks, which is a long time as far as like Eve Media is concerned, to digest that information, such that by the time that the FanFest announcements come out, it is no longer an announcement. It is merely the framework by which the announcements is being made, right? They no longer have to say the words out loud, letting us know that the price is going to go up. They can simply say, this is why the price is going to go up, which is a much better presentation to give when you're in front of the media, right? Which brings me to a point that I actually skipped over earlier, which is public announcements versus private announcements. Why did CCP not talk about the Russia situation in their dev blog, but they did talk about it in, Paragon did talk about it, because the dev blog was a public piece of information, right? It's a public missive. More people see it. It's on the launcher. It goes to public media. It is designed for public consumption. There was only like 190 people in the Discord meeting at its highest. And while we can share it around, it's a much more intimate relationship. And therefore they can talk about things that you probably wouldn't be able to come out with that public announcement. And I understand that that's not private, but my point is that it's more closed circle. It's more intimate. Does that make sense? So you want your presentation at FanFest to be as strong as possible. You do not want the announcement of a change like this to sully that at all. You want to minimize the impact of it. And I believe that they believe, and I think that there's reason to believe that they're correct, announcing it now is the best way to do it. So that way it's pre-processed by the time we have to deal with whatever's at FanFest. And we can just focus on the good stuff. The other thing that he mentioned is, well, worst case announcement is, well, sure, I'll talk about that in a second, but let me finish this thought. He has a throwaway line in the conversation where he says, at least we get to start from the bottom. And that actually makes a lot of sense, right? The more we are pessimistic about CCP, the more that we are doubtful about all of this, the more angst we have right now, the bigger of an impact a really good announcement would be, right? Like, if you go in expecting it to be completely shit, and they actually do come out with something that satisfies you, let alone blows away your socks off, then setting you up to expect it to be awful is to their advantage. Furthermore, one of the things I find very interesting about this announcement is that up until this point, nobody was not as many people were taking FanFest very seriously. Okay? There are some of us who've known for a long time, but a lot of people have never seen a FanFest before. They don't understand the kind of announcements that get made at FanFest and what it could possibly represent. And furthermore, this is the first FanFest with 2 years of backed up development time potentially worked on it, rather than only 6 months. So they have every potential to knock the socks off. And if they announce it now, then but even though they've said this in like economy interviews and all that stuff, the overall, like, people were still being very dismissive of Fanfest. Let's put it that way. This change in particular has now put a lot of additional focus on Fanfest. There are now a lot of people that are aware that Fanfest is coming on the 6th, that now are aware that the Fanfest is coming up and that big changes are coming, that were not aware of that a week ago, which means, and trust me, I'm not saying that they did this intentionally. I think this is probably a happy accident, but you know, whatever. Thank you for joining us down the rabbit hole of Zeeb Online.
Immortal.
I agree, Bad Blood, for the most part. Invasions delivered hard, though. So, Abyss delivered too. So, what they've managed to do is turn one of the worst things that a marketing team or a community team has to ever announce, and they've managed to somehow turn it into an advertisement to watch Fanfest. I mean, that's really good for them. There's a lot more people that are going to be paying attention to what they announce. So if it's good, then it's good. Now, just for fullness of conversation, if it's bad, it burns. Like I said, they have to answer for 2 years of scarcity, not just $5 a month. And more importantly, they could have tiptoed around this. They could have tempered our expectations. They almost always do. I mean, they say that they've got exciting stuff from Fanfest, but like, not quite like this. So if what they come out with is not a lot of content, then the trend that we see going on at best case scenario is that the trend that we see going on continues and probably amplifies, because how many people are waiting for Fanfest? Oh, speaking of the advertisement thing, going back to that real quick, the thing that really drove that home to me is the fact that the one thing that the Mittani could say is, well, how do I feel about it? Well, I'm sitting on my hands until Fanfest. That statement told me that this announcement won, at least on that level. You feel me? If it is bad, then either they've completely bungled it. In other words, they thought they had something amazing, in which case they didn't. We're going to call this Rouge Wedding 2.0. Rouge Wedding being a reference to when Dust 514, all of the people for Dust 514 flew to Iceland because they thought that there was going to be a big announcement. And the big announcement was that it's being ported to another system. And they felt pretty betrayed by that. You know, if we go there and it literally is just like, we're announcing the new shooter. We're coming out with the nullsec changes that we said we were already going to come out with. It's not going to be as interesting as people thought it was. There's a few new event sites or sites and stuff, but it's basically amounts to about a half a dozen escalations here and there. You know, there is a incredibly lackluster version of what they could announce that they could potentially think is really good and not be bought into. I think that if just based on what we know that they're going to announce, he was on the CSM. He can be. I think he can be on the CSM again. Maybe not. Either way, he does not want to be. So that's what's important. No. Hold on. Time out. The Mittani did not give anything that indicated that he had an NDA. What he was saying was based on what Paragon said, right? Everybody's saying wait till Fanfest. And so his response is that he can't say anything, and he's sitting on his hands waiting for Fanfest. And my point was that they literally got the people that speak the worst about these kinds of things to actually wait for Fanfest. That's what I'm trying to say. I actually do not believe that leaked information is out there. I haven't seen anything that seems to work for that. Like candidate, no. So if it's bad, and if it's so bad that they were deceptive when they said that this is one of the coolest things, and they literally have been in maintenance mode, and so they've been developing nothing for the last 2 years, like some of the biggest pessimists feel, then yeah, in my opinion, like at that point, I probably become a professional Final Fantasy 14 player. Like, I'm not joking. Like, my entire language changes. They've set it up. For 2 years, I've been saying, wait till the end of Scarcity. For 6 months, I've been saying, wait till Fanfest. I've been pushing their line. So let me tell you this right now. If Fanfest doesn't deliver, I will be the first person out there with pitchforks and torches telling everybody that now is the time to burn it. This is very really make it or break it time. And you know what? I don't even feel bad about this because they have chosen this bed for themselves. They didn't have to set us up for it. They didn't have to make the claims that they have, but they did. And so either they deliver and all these people that have been naysaying feel at least a little bit silly, or they don't deliver and I feel silly. One of the two. It's just that simple. They might misjudge and piss everybody off. Absolutely. And I think that not everything's going to be as favorable as, you know, like not everything's going to be go over as well as everything else, probably. I mean, just by the nature of things. But the other thing about this is that what a lot of these groups need in order to go from being angsty to okay are relatively minor in this grand scale of things, and things that CCP have already more or less danced around the fact that they're doing. You know, null sec support, being able to affect your null security space, have more control over your space, and like building the new tools and having new sites come out that are an augmentation to the routing system that currently exists. Like, that's bare minimum. That's what they've already announced. So just giving reality to that by describing details at Fanfest, that alone could be good enough to settle a lot of people's concerns. Worst case scenario is you guys have phones, don't you? I mean, I hope that when they announce the PI changes, they make the joke, personally. So I want to be very clear. I'm not optimistic on this. I give it 60-40. 40 that they succeed, 60 that they bungle it in some notable way. They have a lot to prove. And they have a mixed history on actually delivering on what they prove or what they announce. But given the fact that we know how much time they've had to work on things, given the kind of things that we know that they were excited to be working towards before, and given the fact that it seems very obvious that we have an expansion level event coming, Pariah33, thank you for joining us. I believe that it is fairly safe to say that CCP believes that what is coming is going to fundamentally change EVE Online to the point where they are not just changing mechanics. It isn't about changing mechanics. It's not about making new event mission sites. It's, you know, whatever. It's going to be like potentially any or all of those things. It's about rebranding EVE Online to get away from spreadsheets in space, psychopath simulator, and it's for a niche audience. EVE Online has the potential to be the game for a lot of people. But a lackluster PvE in particular has held that back for a long, long, long time. And CCP knows it. So I suspect two things about this expansion. One, we're going to see an overall, not just an expansion of the game, but an attempt to expand the IP itself, either through shooters, comic books, etc. Clear skies, more videos, who knows? And the other thing I know is that war is coming to New Eden. That's it. That's what I have to say about the price increases and its relationship to the Fanfest coming up. I think I actually touched on everything I wanted to touch on for that. Holy crap. Is there a record of the past survey questions that they've sent in the past to players? I mean, I'm sure they have it. I don't think we do. So I'm going to say this right now, Manser. I give it a high probability that the shooter will be announced. But again, I don't think that that's going to be a significant piece of it from an EVE Online point of view. I also don't think that the shooter is going to be coming out right away. I think they're going to announce that it's, about to enter into its alpha or beta or whatever. So again, expanding the universe, the IP. They've been working a lot on expanding the story and the lore and building up a lot of the foundations, both mechanically and as the universe. They have always had an interest in making EVE Online a more living universe. And I think that they're going to make another swing at that. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means Captain's Quarters. I don't know if it means the shooter. I don't know if it means new videos. I don't know if it means, I don't know, a standings revamp. I know that I would eat my hat if there isn't a significant faction warfare update that is at least announced with the details. I know that I would be, my biggest predictions are faction warfare rebalance or redo. But again, I don't know if the faction warfare redo is going to be just simply a tweak of the mechanics of faction warfare, fix the things that we currently know of as in faction warfare, or fundamentally changing what faction warfare is to be more in line with their goals for faction warfare as a feature, and perhaps tie it into more of this whole like relationships with the Empire overhaul, right? I mean, we could see standings change, the way that standings get gained and its impact, and our relationship with the NPCs. We could see our actions have more impact on the universe, either by literally changing the course of the universe by helping one empire attack somewhere else, like, either the Caldari invade Galente or Amar invade Sancha, whatever it is, right? Like our actions one way or another could more accurately or more tangibly influence the course of events, because it's a living universe that we can now interact with rather than a background set of simulation or like, dead universe with repeatable missions and stuff. So, can we see the hat that I'll be eating? It's a big one too, so I'm a bit nervous. Hold on, what did I just say I'd eat the hat for? I'd eat my hat for I'd eat my hat for what now? Can't remember. It was if they don't announce the shooter, right? Yeah. I think well, I'm a bit nervous about that. But or did I say the PI? No, faction warfare. I said faction warfare. I am confident that this hat will stay available to be put on my head. I'll put it that way. Yeah, faction warfare changes. Yeah, look, not only have they indicated that they want to do faction warfare, and yet have not done very many changes at all, which makes it a prime candidate for one of those things that I was talking about them working on it in the background potentially, for a bigger feature change. But everything that they have hinted at, both out of universe and in universe, is charging directly towards war, including war between the empires. A lot of the setup that we see right now is actually a lot of the same beats. It's second cab, by the way. A lot of the things that we see are the same kind of beats that we saw just before Empyrean Age. which was the last time that everything went to shit, and was actually the foundation of that was when faction warfare was created. So, and see again, CCP since 2018, which is when they kind of shifted over to this new system, have been building up a lot of things. One of the reasons why I made that lore portal is because there's been a lot of threads that have been added, characters, locations, and threads that have been developed over the last 2 or 3 years, all pointing towards some future critical event when it all, like when the powder keg goes up. And one of the issues is that likelihood, a fair chunk of that will require the shooter to at least be announced before they can start to like move forward with the story. The problem is that they've tried to move forward with the story a couple of times, and the delay of the shooter and other things have caused them to kind of fall. Excuse me, kind of caused them to fall on their face. The Drifter incursions were far more public, the Throne World attacks, but you know, Case Green Magic was added to the game to be the story leading up to the new Project Nova at the time. And there's still a lot of pieces since then that point to still developing that story more. So we're going to see. We're going to see. I am cautiously optimistic, but at the same time, they have every opportunity to bungle this up. But if they do, we're gonna hold them to task. I'll put it that way. I have spies inside CCP headquarters. I wouldn't go. I mean, I can neither confirm nor do not know. No, I will say that I haven't been given any privileged information by CCP that has led me to this belief. It's just piecing together both what I've seen publicly and also, like, you know, having paid attention for all this time. I at least feel like I can read between the lines some of the time. And you know, we'll see how well that works out. I'm not sure if I trust CCP anymore. The good news is that you don't have to. Like, trust is not an issue right now. Period. This is why he was like, well, if you unsub right now, it'd be unfortunate. Like, there's nothing they can do to stop it, but at the same time, your lack of trust or your trust does not matter. Either they deliver or they don't. Period. A little bit of an aside. People were mentioning opening up Joe Space recently. There's actually something else I should probably bring up. This is a side note. I hope I get to keep it too. I'm very, very proud of this hat. And I'm very well known for this hat. So it would be most unfortunate if I had to digest it. It's also felt, so let's all hope for the best.